Words of Sri Aurobindo from the book Letters on Yoga Part 1 from the Collective Works of Sri Aurobindo Volume 28, page 60, topic the Jivatman in the Integral Yoga, subtopic the Central Being and the Psychic Being. Sri Aurobindo says the central being, most people are not aware of the central being, that is the Jivatman, they are aware only of the ego. The psychic is the soul. It is a portion of the divine that supports the mind, life and body in the evolution. The psychic gets the divine's help directly from the divine. The central being is that which is not born, does not evolve, but presides over all the individual manifestation. The psychic is its projection here, for the psychic being is in the evolution and from within supports our whole evolution. It receives the essence of all experience and by that develops the personality Godward. The self is at once one and all and many, one in its essence. It manifests also as the individual self, which may be described as in nature an eternal portion of the divine. In spirit, a center of the manifestation, individual but extending into universality and rising into transcendence. Sri Aurobindo says it is the central being above the evolution, always the same, that we call the Jivatman. The psychic being is same in the evolution. It is the spark of the divine, there growing into its full divinity as a portion of the divine. The central being and soul are both in different ways portions of the divine. They are in fact two aspects of the same entity, but one is unevolving above nature and other evolves a psychic being in nature. Sri Aurobindo continues to say, the phrase central being in our yoga is usually applied to the portion of the divine in us which supports all the rest and survives through death and birth. This central being has two forms. Above it is the Jivatman, our true being, of which we become aware when the higher self-knowledge comes. Below it is the psychic being which stands behind mind, body and life. The Jivatman is above the manifestation in life and presides over it. The psychic being stands behind the manifestation in life and supports it. The natural attitude of the psychic being is to feel itself as the child, the son of God, the Bhakta. The natural attitude of the psychic being is to feel itself as the child, the son of God, the Bhaktas. It is a portion of the divine, one in essence, but in the dynamics of the manifestation, there is always, even in identity, a difference. The Jivatman, on the contrary, lives in the essence and can merge itself in identity with the divine. But it too, the moment it presides over the dynamics of the manifestation, knows itself as one center of the multiple divine, not as the Parameshwara. It is important to remember this distinction, for otherwise, if there is the least vital egoism, one may begin to think of oneself as an avatara or lose balance like Hriday with Ramakrishna. The next subtopic, the surrender of the central being. Sri Aurobindo says, the central being is that on which all the others depend. If it makes its surrender, that is, renounces its separate fulfillment in order to be an instrument of the divine, then it is easier for the mental, vital and physical to surrender. The central being's surrender to the divine has nothing to do with the suitable circumstances. If the will of the central being turns towards the union with the divine, then it renounces its separate fulfillment. Next subtopic, the central being after liberation. Sri Aurobindo says, what will remain after liberation is the central being, not the ego. The central being will live in the consciousness of the divine everywhere and in all other beings also. So, it will not have the consciousness of a separate ego, but of one center among many of the divine multiplicity. Sri Aurobindo continues to say, on the higher spiritual planes, there is no ego because the oneness of the divine is felt, but they may be the sense of one's true person or individual being, not ego but a portion of the divine. Next subtopic, the Karana Purusha. Sri Aurobindo says, the Karana Purusha is what is called the central being by us, the Jiva. It stands above the play, supporting it always. Next subtopic, the Jivatman and the Chaitya Purusha. Sri Aurobindo says, Jivatman is not the psychic being. We have fixed Chaitya Purusha as the equivalent in the Sanskrit language of the psychic being. Jivatma is the individual self, the central being. Chaitya Purusha, says Sri Aurobindo, Chaitya Purusha means rather the Purusha in the chit, the fundamental inner consciousness. Jiva is the fundamental, or as we call it, the central being, but the fundamental being is not combined of the mental, vital and psychic etc. These are only expressions of the Jivatman. The Jivatman itself is self-existent in the divine, essential in its being. It cannot be regarded as a combination of things. Next subtopic, the Jivatman and the mental Purusha. Sri Aurobindo says when the Atman is individualized, that is, supporting from above the play of individual being, is called the Purusha or sometimes the Jivatman. It is the central being. Usually, however, it is the mental Purusha one first becomes aware of, and through that the nature is led to. To become aware of the psychic being or the central Purusha is more difficult. The mental being within watches, observes and passes judgment on all that happens in you. The psychic does not watch and observe in this way like a witness, but it feels and knows spontaneously in a much more direct and luminous way by the very purity of its nature and the divine instinct within it. And so, whenever it comes to the front, it reveals at once what are the right and what are the wrong moments in your nature. Sri Aurobindo continues to say, the being of man is composed of three elements, the psychic behind, supporting all, the inner mental, vital and physical, and the outer, quite external nature of mind, life and body, which is the instrument of expression. But above all is the central being, Jivatman, which uses them all for its manifestation. It is the portion of this divine self, but this reality of himself is hidden from the external man who replaces this inmost self and soul of him by the mental and the vital ego. It is only those who have begun to know themselves that become aware of the true central being. But still it is always there, standing behind the action of mind, life and body, and is most directly represented by the psychic, which is itself a spark of the divine. It is by the growth of the psychic element in one's own nature that one begins to come into conscious touch with one's own central being above. When that happens and the central being uses a conscious will to control and organize the movements of the nature, it is then that one has a real, a spiritual as opposed to a partial and merely mental or moral self-mastery. Sri Aurobindo says, I don't think the Jivatma is concentrated anywhere except in this sense that in the waking state it is the mental Purusha that leads and the seat of the mental Purusha is in the head, behind the center between the eyebrows. In the dream state, what remains active in the body is the externalizing consciousness for something of it. The entire of that is in the neck, throat, in the Sushupti. If it is real Sushupti, not merely unconscious of dreams but absence of dreams, the consciousness is deep within in the heart center or behind it, for that is the wheel center of the innermost being. Tomorrow we will read more about the spark soul and the psychic being. These are the words of our Lord Sri Aurobindo.